Hey guys, it's Roderick, and I'm here with Jean Grey #1. Now, I know y'all did not think that I was not going to review this comic book, but the true tea is this comic book has been sold out for at least the past 3 weeks since it just came on the show. So I just had to get a special order today. So don't worry, Jean Grey will be on. Of course, you knew I was going to review the comic book of the mother of the mother of the mothers of all Omegas. So let's get into it, but before we get into it, let's kind of talk about the state of affairs with Fall of X, right? So I still have this week's Immortal X-Men to do, which I'll do, and also X-Men 26. So I think it's Immortal X-Men 15. So the way things are kind of shaping on the Fall of X, I like the concept, obviously with coming off the big apex of what happened with the Hellfire Gala. I'm sold, but I'm a little concerned with kind of how things are going to gel together, right? We have Uncanny Avengers, we have Immortal X-Men, we have X-Men 26, we have X-Men, we have X-Force, and nobody in these books, as of the first issues I just reviewed, is coming up with a plan. And we also have Dark X-Men. And the only people who seem to have some type of plan of what to do is Madeline Pryor and Jean Grey, which of course does not really surprise me. But I'm a little concerned with kind of like how this is going to shake out. I'm okay if things end up at the end of this Fall of X, go back to the Krakoan age. I'm okay, but I want to see some substantial changes. I want to see some substantial character arcs. I want to see some people who may have been in the background come to the foreground and showcase their powers, their abilities, their personalities. And I want to see what happens to some of the old guard, right? I want to see some of these fixes. Like, it does no use to go to the Krakoan age if we don't fix some of these things that were kind of flawed with the concept of Krakoa when we first saw them, right? So I'm not poo-pooing on the Fall of X now, but the stakes are very high and Marvel needs to stick this, right? They really, really, really need to stick this. So anyway, that being said, let's get into Jean Grey #1. Now, for context for this issue, we're gonna get some context, okay? So this is Extermination by Ed Brisson, okay? So this is a kind of a trade that's kind of a compilation of a bunch of comic books. Again, Extermination. Go get it. It is fantastic. So what happens in Extermination is this. The 5 original X-Men have been brought from the past to the future by Beast with the thought process that if Scott Summers could see his younger self, then maybe he could stop, his whole, it's kind of like his whole trajectory of where things are going, right? So this is obviously prior to Inhumans versus X-Men and leading to after that, right? Now, as we know, Scott Summers dies in Inhumans versus X-Men, but the 5 original X-Men from the past are still in the present. During that point, they go on different adventures. Jean Grey's on trial. Bobby comes out as gay. Angel loses his wings. Beast becomes maybe more sympathetic. So they're all still kind of in the present / future, right? Now, looking back on this, what we see is that Extermination is really kind of the story arc that begins to clean up some things before the Krakoan age, right? Because we have 5 of the original X-Men that are still in the present, and we know that this big shakeup is going to happen, House of X, Powers of X. So how do we get to reconcile the two? That is what Extermination does, and it does it very, very, very well. So here's what happens in Extermination in a nutshell. The 5 original X-Men are in the present, and all of a sudden, Cable is killed. Cable is killed by a mysterious force, and Bobby Drake is kidnapped. At this point, Jean Grey has come back alive. She's leading her X-Men Red Team from Namor's kingdom. She has a Cerebro, right? A Cerebro under the sea, Cerebro, right? And she's kind of like the de facto leader of all the X-Men that are going on. So now they figured out that someone is kidnapping the original X-Men, which is problematic because if you kill the original X-Men, you don't have any X-Men and the entire timeline continuum is changed, right? So Bobby Drake, his younger self, gets kidnapped, and then Angel gets kidnapped. Jean figures out that whoever did this, the telepathic signatures are the same as Cable's, right? So Cable's dead. We don't know who's killed Cable. Come to find out that the Who has been kidnapping X-Men is a younger version of Cable, because he killed Old Man Cable because he needs to bring the original X-Men back into the past, because we find out that Akbar, who's the person who turned Rachel Summers into a hellhound, is out to kill X-Men. So young Cable is trying to take the X-Men back to the past before Akbar gets to the X-Men and kills the X-Men. Now that's pretty much the larger point. So there are a lot of other little smaller things that are going on, but that's the larger thing. Now, in this process of Akbar and Cable collecting younger X-Men, stopping the X-Men from killing them, there ends up being a big battle in Namor's kingdom, right? Jean Grey figures out that there's these two little psychic, Mamnor and Mamnet, two little French names. Maybe we'll just call them Mabnair and Mabnet, right? They're the ones who are turning people into hellhounds, okay? So Jean Grey, so at this point, young Cable is now on the side of the X-Men, because pretty much Jean is like, look, you can't do this by yourself. They're snatching up people, and if they snatch up and kill any one of us, this is all in game. So at this point, young Cable is working with the X-Men. He's like, okay. So Jean tells her younger self, go to the future, where Mamnor and Mamnet is, figure out how their powers work, come back to this present. When you get back to this present, I will know what to do with them, and can just neutralize this whole situation, okay? Jean goes to the future, sees Mamna and Mabnet, figures out how the powers work. She comes back. Cable's doing all this future taxi driving, right? He comes back to the future. Jean Grey, older Jean Grey, figures out, neutralize the two children. Then they're like, okie dokie pokies, we all need to get ready to go, right? So there's this whole big, really kind of sad goodbye scene, because younger Bobby is like, crap, I've just figured out I'm gay and I want to go back and back in the closet, this whole thing, and everyone's just kind of like, whatever. Mind you, remember, Scott is still dead, okay? Or they think Scott is still dead. That's a whole nother video for another time. Scott's not really dead at this point. But anyway, Jean's like, okay, she talks to her younger self. You're going to go back to the same exact point in which you left. When you get back, put on your old clothes, get rid of the clothes you own, and wipe everybody's memory from what happened in the future, okay? So anyway, BJ get on, Cable takes them all the way back. We complete the time loop. Jean and all the other younger X-Men show back up in. She gets ready. There's a whole thing where really about whether younger Jean and older Jean know that Scott's really alive, because they're complaining about Cable and whatever. But anyway, younger Jean at that point wipes everybody's memories, and then the time loop continual goes on, life goes on. When we start in Jean Grey #1, we're at that moment, right? We're at that moment in Extermination where they would come back to the past. And as Jean Grey is dying, she's trying to figure out exactly where did she go wrong in this process to bring about the future that's happening, right? So she goes back to that extermination moment. And she goes, well, maybe if we did not wipe our memories and we knew what was going to happen in the future, then maybe we could have prevented this from happening, right? So instead of Jean wiping everybody's memories, which has happened at the end of Extermination, Jean keeps her memories, right? And everybody else keeps their memories. And she ends up blocking to Professor X from actually reading their minds to know what's happened. Well, what could potentially go wrong there, right? Jean's logic is, since we know what's going to happen and we have a better use of our powers now than what we do than we would if we were here, then we could potentially stop a lot of these bad things from happening. But the problem with Jean's logic is, Jean is using her logic based upon thinking that she herself at her 14, 15, 16 years age is the same Jean that she meets in the future, right? So Jean Grey with the same knowledge of the future, but without the same practice and manipulation of her powers and the same life experience, does not end up making the right choice, right? So all that happens is Jean comes back, they come back to the past, they fight Magneto, and they're fighting Magneto. Jean and all the others know what's going to happen with Magneto, so Jean decides to do what? Wipe Magnemo's mind, which is a total parallel to what we knew would happen to Magneto in the 90s with the fight between Magneto and Professor X, and ultimately the creation of Onslaught from that process, right? So all Jean is doing is literally filling the vacuum of Magneto because she's so intent on protecting all the mutants. She's using her telepathy to alter people's perceptions, change minds. Professor X gets mad when he finds out that she done wiped Magneto's minds, kicks them out of the mansion. Her and Scott got a condo, living all off of Warren's money, right? And then Beast creates a mobile Cerebro. The thought is that if Jean now, since they're not in the mansion, they can find all of these mutants that are eventually going to come to Professor X, get them now, because what has happened is they have accelerated the mutant hunt by Trask and whatever like that, right? Which is a quite interesting parallel we'll get to at the end. So all that has happened is they have accelerated this, and now Jean is on this kind of strong-arm search to find these mutants. She gets Kitty Pryde, she gets Cannonball, she's collecting all these mutants. Obviously, we don't see Storm in the mix, right? We don't see any of these people that she's collecting, but ultimately what happens is her and the 5 X-Men end up disagreeing because they're like, Jean, you just can't go around just wiping people's memories and doing whatever you want to do. And she's like, you don't understand. You don't understand what's at stake. And they're like, we don't care what's at stake. We just want to, so literally, Bobby goes back to the mansion. She ends up like mind-wiping Trish, mind-wiping Hank. Her and Scott get into it. Scott and Hank are breaking up. And she ends up, there's this moment where she's like, you're a monster. And she's like, I'm not a monster. So then she's like, well, fine, if I'm going to be a monster. And we see Jean, without going into the space, without the M'Kraan crystal, manifest the Phoenix Force, which leads us to believe, once again, or they're trying to retcon this, that Jean there's something that Jean created, right? Kind of like that kind of X-Men Last Stand kind of concept, right? That the Phoenix Force is this cosmic entity that Jean manifested in herself or whatever, or this kind of split personality, as opposed to a separate cosmic entity that inhabits Jean's body. Needless to say, the Phoenix Force in a younger Jean Grey that has less control of her powers ends up leading us to the same result we had in the original Phoenix Saga, Dark Phoenix Saga, is that it ends up driving her crazy and mad in the process, right? And she ends up destroying the X-Men and Professor X, and, we go back and, prior to this, she goes back to the mansion because she starts dropping kids off. And Xavier's like, oh, what the fuck you doing back here? He's like, look, we gotta drop these kids off. They're not safe with us. Kind of like you do when you move out the house of your mama, but you still go back and get groceries. Kind of like, that's kind of what they were doing, right? Like picking up kids and dropping them off. And there's this whole thing with Xavier and Magneto being like, am I just as misguided as she was? So all we see in this storyline arc is that Jean, all she ends up doing is filling the vacuum that was created by Magneto and accelerating really the humans' creation of the Sentinel program, which ends up wiping out and hunting out mutants, okay? So let's put a pause on this. So then at this point, the story kind of ends with Jean being like, okay, that doesn't work. That didn't really work. I was too prideful. I was too stubborn. Let's see what this next thing is. And let's go back. Maybe this is the point in time, right? And we see the kind of space shuttle with the Phoenix Force. So what it kind of looks like that's happening in this is that Jean is on this same type of trajectory that we see Moira was on when we were in House of X, Powers of X, right? Where as Moira goes through her multiple lives trying to change time, to change the ending, we see Moira learning, learning and not learning from the mistakes that she's made, right? Now, I don't want 8 episodes of Jean getting to the conclusion that me, you, and Helen Keller could tell her is the point of which where things really go left. Because I'm about to tell you where things went left for the X-Men with Orchis. Things went left when Sabretooth, Mystique, and Toad stole the technology from Reed Richards and Tony Stark, right? And the X-Men went into space to destroy the space station. That is where things went left. She needs to go back in time, destroy the technology without Reed Richards and Tony Stark finding out, and when they go attack the space station, leave nobody alive, right? The problem when they attacked the space station is they left the scientist alive, even though the husband was dead, and she took the husband's body and created Nimrod, when they just should have killed everybody in the space station. threw the whole thing into the sun. Just take the 11 Omega level mutants there and just kill everybody on the space station and don't leave anybody alive, right? And then when you get back to Earth, you kill Fei Long, and then that should really be do it, right? But of course, I doubt that that's what's really going to happen. It's going to be a very circuitous route of how we're going to get there or whatever. But in my opinion, drop down in the comments and let me know what you think. I think those are the 2 time points of which she needs to focus on. But I'm here for the ride, right? Like, I'm never going to talk badly about a Jean Grey comic book series by herself or whatever. So I'm here for it. I'll see how it goes. But in my opinion, that's where it is, right? So overall, I thought it was great. Like I said, I'm a little concerned as to kind of like how this whole Fall of X is going to pan out. But like I said, I'm here for the ride. I'm invested. I thought this was a great start. I don't want 3 or 4 issues of what ifs, right? Because again, we have a ticking clock. We got 250,000 mutants lost somewhere. We got Orcus running around. We got wishy-washy Captain America. We got side chick Madeline doing her own thing. Like, we need some leadership. We need Mother to come back. We need girls in formation, okay? And nobody puts the girls in formation better than a good old-fashioned Jean Grey to me and my X-Men type of thing, right? So again, I understand it's storytelling. I know we're going to get there. So we'll see how it goes. So anyway, don't forget to like, don't forget to comment, don't forget to subscribe, share this with your friends, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.